Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: the government's 5-year plan, Russia rearming Armenia and possibly Artsakh, press freedoms curtailed in parliament. To talk about these issues, we have with us Asbed Kotchikian, who is an associate professor of political science and international relations at the American University of Armenia, and Hrant Mikaelian, who is a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences at the Caucasus Institute based in Yerevan. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello, Asbed. Hello, Hrant.
All right. Let's start with the government's 5-year plan. Last week, Pashinyan unveiled a new 5-year plan as his government's guiding document. It's highly aspirational, and here are the top ideas from the plan. And if you want to see them, they're in our show notes on our website. So this document will work hand in hand with the Prime Minister's Armenia Transformation Strategy by 2050 plan from a year ago. Reforming the armed forces to secure the nation, active and proactive foreign policy, strategic alliance with Russia and the CSTO, working with the OSCE to determine a status for Nagorno-Karabakh, that's Artsakh, opening regional infrastructures to enhance stable regional environment, annual economic growth of 7 to 9%, minimum monthly salaries raised to 68,000 Armenian drams from the current 55,000 and finally to 85,000, poverty levels to drop below 10% and extreme poverty eradicated, national infrastructure upgrade with EU support, roads, reservoirs, etc., school upgrades, and child support. Third child and above get 50,000 Armenian drams monthly until age 6. Asbed Kotchikian, what were your takeaways from this 5-year plan?
Whenever we talk about 5-year plans in this part of the world, it always reminds you of socialist, communist sort of 5-year plans.
Yes, indeed.
Probably the government is optimistic that they will have a full 5 years in power, but I mean, it's a lot. I have to say it's a lot, and the main question is where would the funding come from? That is one big question. But putting that aside, for the sake of just taking it at face value and look at some of the things that stood out for me, I'd like to start with the issue of the poverty. One of the things is that in 2019, according to the Asian Development Bank, our poverty rate in Armenia was hovering right above 25%, about 26% or so.
Yeah.
According to the World Bank, actually in 2020, it had jumped over 51%. Mostly, obviously, because of the war, but because of COVID as well. So the question is, how are you going to be sort of increasing, or how are you going to be dealing with that issue? Now, the issue of the annual growth rate is relatively easy, right? Because if you're starting from subpar conditions, it's much easier to make that jump to 7 or 9%.
Right.
Now, that put aside, I think a couple of issues in terms of the diplomacy and foreign policy, proactive foreign policy. There were instances where in the program there were mentions about legal diplomacy and economic diplomacy. The economic diplomacy, obviously, trying to bring in investments and so on. The legal diplomacy is about probably to highlight in sort of international legal courts or international legal fora the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh specifically.
So from the economic perspective, you're referring to, for example, inviting foreign direct investment?
Right. Or, having a task of ambassadors and consulars to basically encourage investment and so on, which in itself is problematic because we don't know what kind of a diplomatic corps will be Armenia have in the next year or so in the coming weeks. Now, foreign policy-wise, I think it was quite interesting to see about the relations with Russia and the US, the usual suspects, increasing relations with Russia, also working within the CSTO. By the way, Armenia is going to be taking the chairmanship, if I'm not mistaken, next month, in a couple of weeks. So how do you define it? How can you force? How can you organize things? This is quite fascinating, by the way. In a sort of a side discussion, is that I remember in my research years ago, I was looking at how small countries can actually increase their potential or their influence internationally. And one of the things is that they become active in international organizations because that amplifies sort of their power, their influence. So let's see if Armenia would be able to utilize the chairmanship of the CSTO. one thing quite interesting is that France has been taken out of as a part of the EU, and it has been emphasized as a separate relations. Right? It's in the past, it's always part of the EU, relations with EU, and so on. And
Right.
if I'm not mistaken, the translation would be privileged relations. Armenia has privileged relations with France, and talking about the EU 2.6 billion euros funding for small and medium businesses, North-South Highway, socioeconomic development in the South, e-governance. These are some of them are buzzwords, but I guess that's also part of the reason or part of the conditions of the EU funding coming into Armenia. Interestingly, there was also talk about making Yerevan a smart green city, working on that
I saw that too.
context. So within that, going a bit further, and I'm not going to take more.
I also
Just
wonder if that whole smart city thing is a little bit of a buzzword aspect because the Azeris have been branding the term smart city rebuilding all over the.
It could be. It could be. It could be mostly also the fact that it's a smart and green city,
Yeah.
right? So and focusing on Yerevan, obviously, as always. Now,
Okay.
foreign relation wise, and I think that the government program will put a lot of emphasis and a lot of pressure on the foreign ministry. But talking about Iran and Georgia, there are sections about that, about, good neighborly relations as always. But here's an interesting thing. Talking about border limitation and delineation with
Yes.
Azerbaijan and
Yes.
Georgia, both countries, because Armenia also has some border.
There are border issues between them too,
Right.
Armenia and
I
Georgia.
wouldn't call them issues. I was going to try to find another issue, another word for issues, but border, sort of limbo borders, let's call it.
Right. I didn't call them
An emphasis.
problems. I called them issues.
Issues, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and also talking about the Turkish-Armenian normalization, which is back again, same old. But emphasis that the Nagorno-Karabakh Artsakh conflict should be solved within the OSCE Minsk process. And the two final points, I think this is one of the things about the military, is about decreasing the length of the mandatory service and instead developing a professional army, and sort of like the eye candy for the diaspora, putting an emphasis that the diaspora is going to be a full partner in solving and dealing with Armenian issues rather than tools. That was the wording, if I remember.
Hmm.
And another issue, which is, I think, completely irrelevant, talking about how there should be an attempt to make Western Armenian, give it a special status in Armenia, and so on and so forth. Redundant, and I think it's really wouldn't serve much more than a bunch of probably Western Armenian speakers happy about it that it's mentioned, because
Diasporans.
at the end of the day, the official language of Armenia is Armenian. It doesn't emphasize Eastern or Western. So, why do we need to do this distinction? Anyway, I would like to stop here. I think I took more time than I was thinking of doing.
You alluded to the funding issues, and that was my next question for Hrant. But you know what, Hrant, why don't you talk about your major takeaways from the 5-year plan?
Let's first pass through the topics which have already been discussed. One is increasing the minimal salary from 55 to 68 and then to 85. It's already 68. Maybe they included it as their input.
Mm-hmm.
So having it 85 within 5 years is possibility, especially if we include in the equation the inflation rate, which is, let's say, about 2% annually, and this year it's 8%, so it might be even more. So technically we can have a situation when in 2026 85,000 is the same as 68,000 in 2020.
I see what you're
that's
saying.
one thing. So
because when I looked at it, I thought 55% raise in 5 years. That's quite a lift.
Yeah, but in reality, it's not very, let's say, not very aggressive and not very big step intended.
Mm-hmm.
It's already 68 since the beginning of 2020.
I see.
Concerning 7 to 8% economic growth, well, this year we can expect it because it's economic recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically, we even might have it in 2022 if the global conjuncture will be good. But I don't believe we can have it in long term, especially with the quality of economic governance we have right now. And I don't see, to be frank, I don't see any major improvement which will lead to increase of growth rates. in long term. And I remember when in 2013, Serge Sargsyan's government was intending to have 7% growth annually because they had 7% in 2012. And then in 2013, they already failed. And you can never say beforehand. Mm-hmm. So I think they might have 7% this year, theoretically next year, but highly doubtful that it will be the same in, let's say, 2023 and so on. So this is a bit speculative and very strictly connected to current situation. Now, next is concerning all this stuff concerning smart city and so on and so on. In these terms, or for example, army development, professionalism and so on, I want to see what is done and a bit less on what is spoken. So let's live and see. It has been topic of discussion for a long time already. Whole Yerevan is covered by different billboards, which indicates that Yerevan is already green city or something. But anyway, I think we need some more results. And more important, as of today, is foreign policy. And I will stop here, I think. First, proactive foreign politics. To do that, you need very competent staff. Really competent. Okay, let's imagine that Minister of Foreign Affairs is a political person, and the rest will be competent staff who will follow the line and who will create this policy.
Hrant,
yet we don't do that.
Let's mention here that Ararat Mirzoyan has been appointed foreign minister.
Yeah, which is very doubtful that he can do good foreign policy and proactive foreign policy and so on. Mm-hmm. Next issue is that we need second-track diplomacy or one-and-a-half-track diplomacy, which is, by the way, different things. Then we need to improve our embassy's work, because for many years in Armenia it was perceived that there are many countries with which the government is handling directly. For example, Armenian president or now prime minister should deal with Russia directly on the president level. But, president has its own level, then there is ambassador's level, and then many other levels, which all should be in place. And same refers to all other countries, like Georgia, USA, and so on. And again, I see problems here. And next,
you see problems in the staffing and the staffing and the diplomatic skill set of the staff.
If I may jump in just for a second, Hrant.
Please.
I agree with you in one thing is that the credentials of the new foreign minister might not, as a diplomat, might not be there, but I have a sense that their priority is to restaff and reorganize the ministry itself, and that's where I'm holding my breath actually to see if they're going to be able to put it on a strong foundation. But I agree with you in terms of the proactive foreign policy requires that both software and the hardware, which Armenia doesn't have now at all.
Also, here's another problem. If the minister is a political person and is not very qualified diplomat, okay, but how he is going to elect all those qualified diplomats and all those qualified staff?
That's right.
That's another issue. So the staff is an issue, let's say this. Another thing is that we need good strategy, because just having proactive policy might be even dangerous. And if it is competent, if it is well planned, if there is strategy behind, okay, but we should see this strategy. So again, we should expect that to be published or to be created, maybe not published, but anyway. And then, okay, it's right, they admitted that foreign policy of Armenia is highly dependent on the foreign countries, but we need next step. We need to understand what the interests of that countries are, and to negotiate with them on the basis of that, and to find a way where they can let's say, be matched with Armenian interests. And here is what is missing in the program. And another thing is the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh, which has not been achieved so far, and I'm highly doubtful that in next 5 years it will be possible. Mm-hmm. So I think there are many things which are written in this program which would be good to be implemented. But again, we see more words. We don't see good stuff behind it. Let's see what will happen.
I was actually pleasantly surprised that on paper it all looks pretty good, and also the mention of Nagorno-Karabakh as an issue, as a problem that we have to solve. till now, I just felt like this government has not paid enough attention to Artsakh. Asbed, what did you think about that?
No, I mean, I agree with you, Asbed, and with Hrant as well. I mean, this is an issue. Well, at the end of the day, government plans are always supposed to be dolled up, right? You know, they have to look good and so on and so forth. One of the things, actually, in the first read, with the first read that I had of the plan, first thing that came to my mind is that this is a true reflection of the elections and the election result as
Mm-hmm.
to it's about the economy and it is not about Karabakh. In a webinar a couple of months ago, one of the things when we were talking right after the elections, one of the things I mentioned that I was expecting that it was going to be a hung parliament, but it turns out that Karabakh is less of an issue for the electorate than I thought it would be,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're more concerned about the economy. And if you read again the plan, it seems like there's more emphasis about socioeconomic development. Not that Karabakh is completely forgotten,
Mm-hmm.
but again, it is true to the campaign.
Right.
I
I
mean, the
think actually
military
Pashinyan
component.
mentioned that these are based on the promises he made during the campaign.
Right, right. No, no, no. Of course, of course. I mean, they could have easily changed that with the mandate that he had, but he had actually remained that. Either they don't have time to, prepare something new, or they just took their electoral platform and made it into a government plan. I
Right.
mean, the military seems to be very important in terms of also witnessing the rise of Russian border troops in Armenia. But at the same time, there was a mention, maybe Hrant can also correct me or add to it, that there was a distinction between having border army, like the border protection army, and then the real army. And if I remember correctly, the way it was said that we're going to make sure that the borders are protected by the border protection troops and units, whereas the army would be in the next 5 years will be rearming, retraining,
Mm-hmm.
and becoming more of a professional army. So it's about the illusion probably of security, the illusion that it's secure, also projecting that even if it might not be real security. But I think because that is also important for economic growth and development.
I think it's spoken too much on Russia's role in Armenian defense, and to be frank, too little about Armenia's own role.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we are giving all borders to Russia, then where Armenia does start? It's written that some of the borders will be managed by, let's say, Russian some border guards or something. But if we listen to what Pashinyan is saying, he is saying, okay, they stand on Turkish border, on Iranian border. They are already standing on Sunni's border, and now he calls them to stand on other borders with Azerbaijan as well. So it's only Armenian-Georgian border which is left after all, which is to me a big problem.
Okay. Well, let's assess this as a positive on paper, and we'll watch how the implementations go.
Right.
Let's move to the next topic. Is Russia rearming Armenia? News broke out earlier this week that Russia has started rearming Armenia. Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, loudly complained that Armenian troops and weaponry are also making their way through the Lachin corridor to Artsakh, and said that he sees no need for rearming Armenia because the war has ended. Later in the week, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that supplying arms to other countries is Russia's sovereign right, and that confrontational and bellicose statements do not help the peace process in the South Caucasus. She was clearly alluding to Aliyev's statements on CNN Turk, although she didn't mention him. Meanwhile, the tripartite negotiations between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia have restarted about opening communications, primarily through Armenia. Hrant, has Russia started rearming Armenia, and if so, then why now?
Well, first of all, I should say I don't have exact data on that, and I don't think I should be the right person on that because it's not publicly available data. But anyway, what can I say? I can answer to Aliyev that if the war is over, then why Azerbaijan is rearming itself?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm afraid that war is not over. So if there is some negotiation, and by the way, Aliyev is speaking about that all the third time, I think, because first time he spoke already in 2020, in late 2020, that he said Armenia's allies are rearming it, are trying to rearm it. Who against are you rearming Armenia and so on? Now, I hope it is in process. I hope we will not have a chance to check it. Let me finish with this.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is that this is also in tune. Probably we there are a couple of things here to keep in mind. That is, just like before September 2020, in the minds of Armenians, the war is over. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is resolved. We don't have to worry about it, and so on, which was a major miscalculation on our side. And the same thing is happening now with Azerbaijan. They are looking at it, okay, this is the issue is over. There is no need to look at things and so on. Maybe not so much as the war is over, but this issue is resolved. And that's one thing to keep in mind. And this is where
Yeah.
probably Aliyev's statements are coming from. The other thing is that we have to also realize that Azerbaijan is very uneasy with the presence of Russian troops in the region on quote unquote its territory or in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah.
And it is also apprehensive about the phenomenon of having weapons coming into Armenia and arming the Armenian army, but at the same time, some of those weapons coming to Artsakh, and basically the Russian army potentially. And again, this is based on nothing. It's not based on any information, whatever. But Russian auxiliary troops
Well, so
from the local
quickly, Asbed,
population, quite possible.
we've read
Mhm.
a couple of articles about the fact that there have been some arms flow out to Artsakh, and Aliyev has actually been saying that they've been watching through Shushi, through the Lachin corridor, seeing that arms are being supplied to Artsakh. Assuming that this is true,
Mhm.
why suddenly now the Russians feel the necessity? Are they kind of preparing for a war scenario? Do they think that there's a resumption of war likelihood? Why else would they
Right.
be arming the Artsakh defense forces?
Okay, I'm no military expert and I don't have the answer for this, but if we were to assume that the Armenian military equipment were completely destroyed, decimated
Right,
even in the
right.
war, right? That's one
Particularly in
assumption. Also
Artsakh, yeah.
assuming, yeah, exactly. The second assumption being that this is an arms flow coming in based on requests from Armenia. My analysis would be that A, it's replenishing. Russia is trying to replenish Armenia's military equipment in not only in Artsakh but also throughout Armenia, but also upgrading and updating or changing the nature of the military equipment coming in. Because if anything, you learn, and again, this is all based on conjecture,
Sure.
no facts, and so on. If you lose a war, you end up having, you assess what we didn't do well and what do we need to face the next
Well,
war.
my question
Remember,
was
one of the
actually
things
more on the political level. I mean, whether they're starting to see the likelihood of war going up, and that's why they've started doing this, rather than
I
exactly
can't
what
get into their
armament.
mind, but this is the Russian modus operandi.
Hmm.
In 1973 war, in 1967 war between Israel and the Arab countries, but also in 1973 war, especially in 1973 war, the Syrian army, the Syrian Air Force was decimated, was completely destroyed. Within a week, the Russians replenished it.
Uh-huh.
Because then at the end of the day, no, it's not about just replenishing, selling weapons and so on. It's also about keeping this strategic balance of power. And they know that the balance of power has shifted in the region in the favor of Azerbaijan, and their presence can only bring so much, into bringing that balance back up. So
Okay.
they want to also have Armenia stand on its own, and this is also maybe the reason why you would have all this discussion in the government 5-year plan that we talked about earlier about Armenia saying that, oh, we're going to have a professional army and so on. I don't know. I haven't been following. Maybe Hrant has been about, what would Armenia's military doctrine be? What is going to be
Hmm.
its rearming strategy? And by the way, in the 5-year plan, there was also a mention that the Armenian-U.S. relations have reached a new dimension where they're going to be cooperating on a military level. I have no idea what that means. It might be overblown, but that's what Russia is doing. I think it's like
Okay.
both its
Maybe.
peacekeeping forces, but also the Armenian army trying to rearm the army.
Hrant, so two quick questions for you, actually. First of all, do you see that the likelihood of war has increased in the last couple of months? And second, do you think that this process, if it's going on right now, is complementary to what we were talking about in the 5-year plan?
Yeah, so far we can assess that likelihood of war has increased and that region has become more tense. And as far as I know, the probability of war is assessed as higher than previously by the officials who are dealing with it. I won't go into details right here, but
Hmm.
I can say that they are they're having these scenarios as well as now, right now. So in this term, there might be a sense why Russia would think about rearming Armenia. But another thing is that Russia might be also increasing its own contingent, maybe not number of people, not personnel, but weaponry. Maybe they're doing this. It might not be directly arming Armenia, but it might be rearming Russian troops in Armenia and Artsakh, because they have a lot of new troops in Sunik, for example, and they need more weaponry for it. So, to be frank, it's hard to assess specifically what's going on the field.
I agree with what Hrant was saying, except with one caveat. I do not feel that there is, I mean, the likelihood of war is higher. Just from the simple perspective that the fact that it's been, less than a year, well, actually almost a year now since the war. And for Azerbaijan to start another attack or another war is quite unlikely because I don't think that Aliyev, even though as an authoritarian regime, can motivate his people because they would say, hey, man, we already won. What do you expect us to do? And the other hand, also Turkey is not as invested. I mean, from in starting another conflict. I mean, they did this. They were successful. They got what they wanted,
They
and then
declared
some.
victory and they left.
Exactly, and they have other things on their plate. And also, don't forget that the fact that you have Russian soldiers, Russian troops in Nagorno-Karabakh, that makes it Azerbaijan very wary. Even by accident, if they hurt or kill a Russian peacekeeper, the full wrath of Russia would come down on them. And I also want to maintain, as much as a lot of people don't agree with this, is that Armenia's borders are protected by the CSTO as long as Armenia does not initiate an attack, right? And is attacked itself, then the CSTO is obliged to help. Now, obliged on paper, that's another thing, if they're going to do it in reality. But I personally think that the risk of war, I'm not going to say it's low, but it's not higher than what it used to be.
Well, that's interesting. All right, I'm going to move on to the next topic here, which is press freedoms curtailed in the parliament. Since the start of his term as parliament speaker for the 8th convocation of the National Assembly, Alen Simonian has been dealing with a heavy hand with the press, reporting on the proceedings of the parliament. He has ordered the press removed, photographing stopped, or live televising halted at moments of high tension in the parliament, and there have been a lot of high tension moments. At the start of the convocation, the media were informed that they no longer had the same freedoms of movement in parliament as they did before. Specifically, it seems that they'll now be restricted to a media box, which is set up at the balcony level of the National Assembly. The official reason given was security, but this basically allows MPs who don't want to deal with the press to come and go without being questioned. Asbed, is this the start of something sinister, or is it more of an insecure government trying to, a little bit out of its league right now?
My answer is yes. I think it's a bit of both. I think there's an element of insecurity. There's an element of the government also realizing, or the civil contract party realizing that the opposition is going to be quite vocal in the parliament, especially as we've seen from limited amount of what we could see, the Hayastan Alliance, the Armenia Alliance members have been quite active and so on and so forth. So, denying them that forum, or at least broadcasting what they're saying, is one thing. It's also about trying to have more control in a more controlled environment, but also their insecurities, their own insecurities. I mean, today I was walking around in Yerevan, and one of the things I was thinking is that 2 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see deputies from my step, or even the prime minister, or the speaker of the house, or the president, walking around. And I was thinking, I wonder what would happen if any of those people would be, especially, from civil contract, would be in the street. How would people react, and so on and so forth. So that whole thing about openness and so on. I haven't been to the parliament yet, but, immediately after the revolution in 2018, they opened up the gardens of the parliament. People would go in and roam around and stroll and so on. I think they closed it. It is still closed. So it is a reversal. And there are a lot of people who are quite concerned about media freedom in Armenia. It hasn't gotten to the point where the media freedom is curtailed just in the parliament. It's just there. It hasn't gone beyond that. But there are quite quite concerns, legitimate concerns about media laws and how that can blanket over larger legislation about controlling the media.
Hrant, are you concerned?
Well, I think there is a place to be concerned because, for example, we had almost a year, we had this military state of affairs, and beforehand, during the coronavirus, we had other restrictions for the media, so it took almost 1 year. All the restrictions, it also negatively affected media, and then several new laws were accepted. So, and yeah, visually you can see it by closed garden of the parliament. So yeah, there is clear intention of limiting media freedoms. So I hope it will not go very far, but we need to fight to prevent it.
So this week, the president of the Center for Press Freedom NGO in Armenia, Shushan Doidian, said that this issue of restrictions must go to the Constitutional Court. And a lot of NGOs have also protested that these press limitations are of great concern to them. We know the Civil Contract Party pays a lot of attention to international ratings and rankings, such as the Press Freedom Index. Asbed, maybe I can ask you, should these issues end up in the Constitutional Court or even in European courts? And will these issues hurt Armenia or this government's relationship with its Western patrons?
I don't think it would hurt. I think it's good. See, the problem here, or the challenge here, is that you want the glass ceiling to stay up. You don't want the glass ceiling to come down.
Absolutely.
And where any kind of any activity and any kind of an approach is okay with that. And don't forget, when it comes to unfortunately, when it comes to issues about freedom and so on and so forth, the European courts or PACE and so on, they might come up with statements. But at the end of the day, the business of politics is politics. It's not legality, it's not anything. We had the similar events under former President Sarkisian, where the West kept criticizing and so on and so forth about this and that political oppression or media curtailing media freedoms and so on. But at the end of the day, they did sign agreements, they did make deals and so on and so forth. But it is important to have that. And this is also, an interesting phenomenon that the same environment that was created before 2018, an environment where the media was semi-free, where civil society was active and so on and so forth, which actually nourished and helped develop or create or gave a momentum to the 2018 movement, can also be used now. And either they have short-term memory, the current government, or they are unaware or sure that there is no other civil society except the ones that supported them. But I think that is quite a possible approach where the battlefield will be in the civil society level, but at the same time the media level, and challenging government decisions.
Hrant, what are your thoughts? Do you think that these issues are going to affect the government, or they simply don't care and they'll do whatever they want?
They showed multiple times that they do care. They try to react every time there is negative information spread, but it does not mean that they are going to take different opinions into consideration. More, I would expect that they would perceive this field, that media is a field of fight, and this is how they perceive it. And sometimes they are saying that the threat to media freedoms in Armenia is that there are some medias which belong to previous regime representatives. So, in fact, they do not accept the diversity, pluralism, and this is another concern. Even the expression which lately Pashinyan started using very actively, the dictatorship of law, which is in its core as an idea might be a good thing, but I'm afraid within the context that Pashinyan is using, it might be a bit different thing, but then what is it intended to be?
Well, my personal view is that this government is relying so much on EU support, euro dollars, that if this kind of noise gets to, for example, the ECHR, I think, they will care a lot, basically, right?
But Asbed, that the money, or especially the budget or the loan or the grant, the 2.6 billion euros that is given, it's already
most of it being loan guarantees.
Yeah, and they're done. And also, don't forget one of the things And I haven't been able to find a definitive proof for this or a statement about this. But the 2.6 didn't appear out of nowhere, by the way. It didn't appear after the war. This was a discussion that has been ongoing
Right.
in the last 2 years, even
Okay.
before the war. Now, the war might have precipitated it, might have given the, oh, poor Armenia kind of a thing. Okay, now we'll put it on the fast track and so on. But again, they wouldn't do that. See, I've done enough work with consulting, legal, doing consultative work with the EU and European Council of Europe on ECHR or ECTR and so on and so forth, the courts and their decisions and so on. That at the end of the day, it doesn't do much really. So many cases are out there brought against Russia, Belarus, and so on, and they don't it's not going to have an impact there. They're going to do anything. Now, one thing that I would have to say is that I think you phrased the question in such a way, maybe it might make a difference in the minds of the government because they are more Western looking, more
I
Europe
see.
looking, and so on and so forth. But even then, I think, again, I haven't been able to get into these people's mind as to, with the height of the pride, with the height of the sort of popularity, followed by a crushing defeat, and then winning again. What does that make you? How does that does that make you more wary of what others think, or you would say, screw it, I don't care what others think, even if the court is gonna pass this decision and decision, and we're gonna do this
Right.
by hook or by crook.
Right. Okay. Well, that would conclude my questions. I want to quickly ask both Asbed and Hrant, do you have one topic from the previous week that you want to say something about?
There were some topics, but I don't have very specific topic. Rather, I would like to discuss a bit an opposition,
Okay.
if we may. Well, I think as of now, Armenia struggles with having established opposition. We still don't have it. Generally, we can say we never had it in all 30 years, and we still don't have it, despite the fact that we have two opposition factions in the parliament, which are strict opponents of the current government. But it doesn't mean that they can do their job and they can fully scaled, let's say, represent their electors or represent, let's say, alternative point of view. In many ways, still the political field is shaped by people who perceive politics as a profession or the way where they can, let's say, just make money, which is a fact almost everywhere. But let's say we still lack professionalism. And I think lack of professionalism in the government, which we always discuss, and which is the most important, should not let us to forget about lack of professionalism in the opposition as well. So I think there are a lot of issues which Armenia is facing, which neither government nor opposition are able to represent. And I think until we have adequate opposition, which is adequate in the way it's able to mobilize its support, to present alternative point of view on different issues, or to, let's say, run some campaigns in favor of some, let's say, underrepresented groups and so on and so forth, and also to focus on important foreign politics issues, and maybe even creating shadow government and so on, I think we will be also stuck. So I think today opposition has a lot to say, which is not able to do yet, and generally Parliament will start working since September, and I think we should discuss a lot what opposition is doing as well in the future.
One thing, Hrant, that when you talk about opposition, in a way, I felt that you were talking about the parliamentary opposition. I was wondering if you feel that there might be extra parliamentary opposition in any way or would be relevant in any way. Because again, now that earlier when we were talking about the media freedom, I was saying that the opposition has a platform now and a vocal opposition, unlike the previous parliament, for instance, and probably in the last 2 or 3 parliaments convocations. But I'm not optimistic about the extra parliamentary opposition in terms of what, if anything, they can do. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
We also can have some expectations from extra parliamentary opposition, but here are several issues. First of all, we had, let's say, for example, the fourth party, which is Prosperous Armenia Party, which did not pass to parliament. It's a very big question. Are they going to stay online or not? Because there is a feeling that we will not have this party anymore. That's first issue. Another issue is several minor parties which were, let's say, unclear to whom are they opposition more, to the government or to another opposition. And today or 2 days ago, we have seen them with some of the parties, let's say, for example, Babajanyan, with portrait of Nikol Pashinyan and so on. So that's also a question. What they can do to represent alternative point of view and to, let's say, fill the gaps in the field. So extra parliamentary opposition to me is a big doubt right now. For example, another question is what will be the fate of Bright Armenia Party. It's really interesting question because unlike, for example, Prosperous Armenia Party, they had several good let's say cadres. They had several well-prepared professionals.
Those are my thoughts exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Where will they go?
Professional politicians. They were professional politicians, basically. I mean, prosperous Armenia. Again, at the end of the day, we know it was motivated by and fueled by, and it was a tool of, Gagik Zarugyan. So, I mean, he cares rat's ass about, whether he's represented in the parliament or not, or he has any parliamentary immunity, unless they decide to go after him. Or not. But yeah, there are a lot of smaller parties. It would be interesting to see how in the US, for instance, or in the West, you see, former politicians going into the private business as consultants here and there and so on. But I don't think that there is anything equivalent in Armenia. So it might be, and 4 years or 5 years, assuming that it's going to be 5 years, is a long time in politics, and it would be quite difficult for these parties to sort of make a comeback, and so on.
True, and then there is question. Yeah, very shortly, and then there is question with both factions in the parliament, because, for example, if we look at the I have a honor bloc, there is Republican Party, top representatives of which are also not included. It's let's say second team there, so it's another question how they are going to work and where will be the first team. And then we have a question with the Armenia bloc, because it's already obvious that Kotchikian is not controlling whole bloc. There are Dashnaks, there are other representatives, and Kotchikian is going to create his own party. So effectively, we might not have Armenia bloc as was intended. So
Right.
again, I'm saying that it's a big problem right now of Armenia that it's a weak opposition. It's opposition which is not able to present many things in the parliament, and not only in the parliament, maybe outside as well. And also parliamentary parties working outside of the parliament as well. So yet we have to see since September mainly, but I'm very doubtful that a lot of things can be done.
Very interesting. Asbed, do you have a topic that you would like to discuss?
There are a lot of topics I want to discuss, but for the brevity of it, I have one thing that has been on my mind with the beginning of school year here in Armenia, but also looking around with rising numbers of COVID infections and so on, especially in the neighboring country in Georgia. Where there are about 5 to 6 thousand cases per day, and I'm not sure. I mean, the border is open. People are, it's like again the gates of zoo, the zoo gates are open, so people are running out of Armenia just to experience different things. And it's quite interesting to see local tourism also developing because people can't go anywhere. But I am quite wary and quite nervous about the fall once the weather gets cooler and so on, how with the COVID cases, especially with the new variant, come up, and the lack of interest or the lack of any even attention to that. It's something that is bothering me, and something that I'd like to keep an eye on. I'd like us to talk about. Not that again, even for the self-depreciation. We don't have thousands of followers here, but
Hmm.
anyone who is listening and so on, really, it is important to emphasize this because I'm quite concerned that all this lockdowns and so on and so forth. Not that they might end up having a lockdown, but it could have again a negative
Asbed, you're
impact.
talking about a global issue, not just an
No,
issue
no,
in
no. Of course,
Armenia.
of course.
We
I'm
have it
looking at
in the
it from
same
a microcosm.
Yeah, we,
Yeah.
we have the same problem in the US where, there is the D variant has been ramping up and there's
Right.
absolutely no will anywhere to do a new lockdown. People, I think, are
Oh,
so
we're
over that.
fatigued, right? Just like people are fatigued from
Yeah.
talking about the war. People were fatigued about talking about Pashinyan being a quote unquote traitor. People are tired. There's a fatigue also of the sort of COVID situation.
Hmm.
And it conjures bad memories. Then people don't want to even
Absolutely.
hear about the possibility of going back to a lockdown.
All right. Thank you both. I think we can wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Asbed and Hrant.
Thank you, Hrant. Thank you, Asbed.
Thank you, Asbed. Guys, thank you.
Well, that was our week in review show, and we hope it helped you catch up with some of the issues in and around Armenia from this past week. As always, we invite your feedback and your suggestions. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms, or our website, groong.org. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a great week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.